Hey everyone, and welcome to another edition of our February Adult Storytime for Adults. I'm your host, Katie from Adult Services, and if you recall, we are celebrating both Black History Month and romance titles this month. And so we are delving into some amazing Black romance authors. And this week we are going to read from Get a Life, Chloe Brown by the wonderful Talia Hibbert. And let me just show you Talia here. That's Talia, a little focus. There we go. There's Talia. All right, so a little bit about Talia. Talia Hibbert is a Black British romance novelist. She writes contemporary and paranormal romance. Critics describe her as a writer of diverse narratives with characters of varying race, ethnicity, body shape, sexual orientation, and life experience. And her best book is Get a Life, Chloe Brown. So let me tell you a little bit about the book and about Chloe Brown. I personally really enjoyed this title. I thought it was great fun. Our protagonist and her romantic lead are both very prickly, funny, very distinct voices. So let me tell you a little bit about the book. Get a Life, Chloe Brown, a witty, hilarious romantic comedy about a woman who's tired of being boring and recruits her mysterious, sexy neighbor to help her experience new things. Perfect for fans of Sally Thorne, Jasmine Guillory, and Helen Hoang. All right, and I personally loved Chloe myself because they describe her this way. Chloe is a chronically ill computer geek with a goal, a plan, and a list. So Chloe is like, sometimes romance novels have kind of, you just relate to different protagonists in different ways. And I really enjoyed Chloe's sass and the way that she dealt with life's hardships. I thought that was something that was pretty cool and kind of rare for the genre. So let's get into it. Here is the cover, so you can take a look at it on Hoopla, which is where I checked it out. Again, Hoopla is such a great resource for ebooks. No wait times, no holds. You can just click and you have the book right there at your fingertips. So here we go. Let's take a look at Get a Life, Chloe Brown. Now, before we begin, remember we're doing a spice rating, and I would give this book, I would give it a 4 or 4.5 spice emojis, fire emojis out of 5. It was a hint spicier than Duke by Default, and that's all I will say about that. So if you're looking for a little extra spice and some extra humor, this might be the book for you. I'm going to start at chapter 3 in the book, which is kind of an inciting incident between our protagonist, Chloe, and the super where she lives, Red. Okay, so here we go. Get a Life, Chloe Brown, chapter 3. Walking improved heart health, significantly reduced one's chances of breast cancer, and qualified as a relatively low-impact sport. Despite this last fact, and despite the New Balance walking trainers Chloe had bought especially, her knees were bloody killing her. "You," she muttered to the pavement beneath her feet, "are a first-class scoundrel." The pavement refused to respond, which struck her as rather petty. If it was bold enough to jar her bones with every step, it should be bold enough to defend its reprehensible solidity. Then again, Chloe's current predicament could be her own fault. She'd skipped her painkillers this morning because she was feeling lively, so she probably shouldn't have spent the last 27 minutes messing around outdoors, gulping down the crisp autumn air and pushing herself just a little bit harder than usual. Hindsight was 20/20 and all that. She could feel familiar tendrils of soreness burrowing into her body's weak points, could see the dull gray of exhaustion at the edges of her mind. But she was nearly home now. Chloe wandered across the little park opposite her building. Grass, thank Christ, and planned to reward herself with some lovely drugs, fluffy pajamas, and several dark chocolate chip cookies. Dark chocolate, obviously, was an extremely healthy choice. The antioxidants canceled out the sugar almost entirely. Oh, there was a cat in a tree. She stopped short, Her thoughts scattered. A cat. In a tree. Had she stumbled into the pages of a children's book? To her right stood the oak tree that dominated most of this random green area, and in the highest spindly branches of that oak sat a cat. It was both a familiar concept and a completely baffling sight. For all that she had heard of cats in trees, she'd never actually come across one. She folded her arms, squinted against the too bright, too pale sky, and listened to the creature's plaintive meows. After a moment, she called, "You sound as though you're stuck." The cat screeched its affirmative like a miniature murder victim. It was small, but wonderfully fat, with fur so gray as to seem almost black, and piercing eyes that said, "Surely you won't leave me here." Chloe sighed. "Are you sure you can't get down? I don't mean to be rude, but you know how this goes. Some gullible, bleeding heart type clambers into a tree after a cat, only for said cat to leap mischievously down at the last second." Another shriek, this one blatantly indignant. "A fair point," Chloe conceded. "Just because you appear well doesn't mean you don't require help. I, above all, should know that. I will call the fire brigade for you." The cat meowed some more and glared down at her, a skeptical smudge against the sky. She was now quite certain that it was saying something like, "The fire brigade, you wasteful cow. Don't you realize we live in an era of austerity? Would you take much-needed public services away from children trapped in bathrooms and old ladies who've left the iron on? For shame." This cat, like most of its species, seemed rather judgmental. Chloe didn't mind. She appreciated bluntness in a beastly companion. And, well, it had a point. Why should she bother the fire-type people when she had a semi-functional body of her own? Fetching this cat might not be the cleverest way to end her walk, but then staid, sensible Chloe Brown was dead. New Chloe was a reckless, exciting sort of woman who, in moments of crisis, didn't wait for the assistance of trained professionals. The thought plucked at her like a harpist plucked at strings. She vibrated with ill-advised intent. She would dominate this tree. A decent hand and foothold were required to begin. She knew that from watching a young Danny scamper up and down these things for years. Side note, Danny is her sister. The oak's trunk was both soft and hard under Chloe's hands, its bark crumbly and damp, its core immovable. She liked the contrast, even if it scratched at her palms and threatened to snag on her leggings. Her waterproof jacket made an odd, slithery noise as she reached up toward the first branch. Then her fingers closed around a sturdy bough, and she heaved herself up as her feet pushed off the trunk, and everything felt utterly free. Her muscles were still weary, and her joints still ached. The only difference was she no longer gave a damn. There was a nasty little voice in her head that warned her she'd pay for this, that her body would demand retribution. She had been practicing telling that voice to F off, and she did so now. The cat's whining spiked as she climbed, and Chloe chose to interpret that as enthusiastic cheerleading. "Well done, human," meowed the cat. "You're a total badass. You should definitely add this to your Get a Life list so you can cross it off immediately and feel extra accomplished." Chloe considered, then discarded the cat's generous suggestion. The Get a Life list was a historical document that she couldn't bring herself to alter. "Thank you, though," she panted, and then worried about the fact that she was panting. Her lungs were working overtime, and every breath felt like the edge of a saw. She had a metallic taste in the back of her mouth that reminded her unpleasantly of blood, and also of the days when she'd had to run laps in PE. Apparently, this climb was wearing her out. But she'd been taking irregular walks for years, damn it. Surely she could be a semi-pro athlete by now. Apparently not. The human body was an inconvenient and unreasonable thing. She kept climbing, anyway, and developed a system. She'd drag herself onto a sturdy branch, shuffle along on her bottom, rather undignified, but it couldn't be helped, reach for the next branch, drag herself up, and so on. It worked like a charm and took forever, probably due to her frequent rest breaks. And then, all of a sudden, she got so high that the branches thinned out. Oh dear. Chloe was not petite. She was on the taller side, big-boned, and well-insulated for the winter, like a rabbit. Except the insulation lasted all year round. Her size wasn't something she often thought about, but as she reached a particularly slender branch, she could suddenly think of nothing but. She eyed the branch suspiciously. Could it take approximately 15 stone of woman? She doubted it. "Cat," she said, or rather wheezed, "you might need to come down just a bit. Throw yourself into my arms, perhaps." She released her death grip on the branch, clenched her core to ensure her balance, and held up encouraging hands. "Oh, come on then. Leap of faith and all that." The cat did not look impressed. "I won't drop you," she said. "Promise. I'm an excellent catch. I played netball for the county team, you know." The cat gave her a hard stare. She sighed. "Yes, it was over a decade ago, which is mean of you to point out, by the way." Perhaps the cat appreciated her honesty because it extended one delicate paw and seemed to consider a path of descent. "That's the spirit, darling. Down you pop." With alarming agility, the cat did indeed come down. Chloe was surprised, all things considered, that it didn't leap comfortably out of the tree and leave her behind. Judging by its suddenly silky movements, it must have been able to. And yet, instead of making its escape, it hopped from one branch to the next until it came to rest on her lap, precisely as directed. She stared at the bundle of smoky fur currently nuzzling her stomach. After a moment of astonishment, she choked out, "You can't actually understand me, can you? Because if so, don't worry. I'll protect your secret to the death." From beneath her, a rough voice punched through the Sunday quiet. "So will I." She almost fell out of the tree. After that heart-jolting moment, Chloe clutched a nearby bough for balance and blinked down at the source of the words. She found Redford Morgan squinting up at her, his hands in his pockets, his fine mouth curved into what must be a smirk. Oh no. Oh no, 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 no. She became uncomfortably aware of the cool, prickly sweat coating her skin, the strands of frizzy hair that had escaped her bun, and, oh yes, the fact that she was sitting in a tree talking nonsense to a cat. Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. Embarrassment leaked past her most stalwart defenses to flood her cheeks with unwanted heat. She searched for something appropriately cutting to say, and discovered that every intelligent thought in her head had evaporated. Gigi's voice came in like a divine message. Gigi as her grandmother. "Keep calm, Chloe dear, and whatever you bloody do, don't fall." Sound advice from imaginary Gigi. "Hello, Mr. Morgan," she croaked, then kicked herself. Mr. Morgan? She'd regressed. Redford had been bad enough. At this rate, she wouldn't call him Red until 2056. His strange little smirk widened into a full-blown grin, and she realized that he hadn't been smirking at all. No, he was holding back laughter, his amusement dancing through the air around him like an electrical current. His big body practically vibrated with it. She considered telling him to just get on with it, to laugh at her, since she was sure she made a hilarious picture right now. But before she could work up the words, he spoke again. "Are you stuck, Ms. Brown?" She didn't miss the emphasis he put on her name, as sarcastic as the single eyebrow he raised. Goodness gracious, he'd better stop that. Looking at him was distracting enough. If he started to emote, her brain might short-circuit. Human beings, so very vital, should not be allowed to roam the streets unsupervised. Someone, Chloe, could die of fascinated envy and sheer self-consciousness. "No," she said with great dignity, "I am not stuck." It wasn't necessarily a lie, since she hadn't tried to get down yet. "Are you sure?" he asked, "because I wouldn't mind giving you a hand." She snorted. How on earth would he give her a hand down a tree? "Are you on drugs, Mr. Morgan?" His smile turned into a scowl. The expression didn't suit his cat-like eyes or his upturned mouth, which just made it all more effective. "No," he said shortly. Then he tutted loudly and shook his head as if he despaired of her. Actually, he did despair of her. He'd made that rather clear. For some reason, instead of ignoring him to prove how very little she cared, she found herself blurting, "I didn't mean that in a bad way." Which was true, actually. She'd been joking, only jokes had never been Chloe's forte. Something about delivery. It's Sunday, after all. No work obligations. A perfectly acceptable day for recreational drug use. He blinked up at her, his scowl replaced by bafflement. "Do you take drugs on Sundays, then?" he asked finally. "I take drugs every day," she said. Then she remembered that he was the superintendent of her building and added, "Legal drugs. Very legal drugs. Doctor's orders." His eyebrows flew up. They were the same amber copper shade as his hair, so they stood out starkly against his pale skin. "Is that right?" Time to change the subject. Otherwise, he'd start asking questions, and she'd answer out of politeness, and then they'd be sitting there discussing her medical history as if it were a topic as mundane as the weather. Do you know, she said, sinking her icy fingers into her troublesome cat friend's fur, I think I might be stuck after all. He folded his arms. Considering his height, the breadth of his shoulders, and the beaten-up black leather jacket he wore, the overall effect was slightly intimidating. I thought you said you weren't. So that was just a short taste of Get a Life, Chloe Brown, which again, by Talia Hibbert, I found to be hilarious, very funny, very sweet, great representation for people with chronic illness, and, you know, kind of funny, sarcastic type female leads, which isn't something you always get in romance novels. So I had a great time reading this book. Again, it's pretty spicy. Once Chloe and Red make their agreement, so get ready for that if you're interested in taking a look. Again, I would say 4 to 4.5 spicy fire emojis out of 5 for that one. So thank you so much for joining me today. We have 2 more romance novels coming up for the rest of the month. I know last week I said we only were doing 3 this month, but I lied. We are doing 4. So next time I will be featuring a different book called The Best Worst Man by Mia Sosa. And I think you'll really enjoy that one as well. So I look forward to seeing you again soon, and I hope you're happy, well, and safe, keeping yourself nice and healthy, and we will see each other again soon. Thanks so much, everyone. Bye.